Madam Deputy Clerk, we are reporting out of closed session. We have two items. First item, 4.1.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Motion for the first item is to receive the report and that the confidential direction to staff be confirmed.
We had a mover and a seconder, please. Moved by Councillor Weiss, second Councillor Gallo. Comments, questions? Recorded vote.
A recorded vote has been requested for the first item of council closed session this evening. Councillor Thompson, how do you vote?
Yes.
Councillor Thompson votes yes. Councillor Gardner, how do you vote? Absent. Councillor Gillen, how do you vote? Councillor Gillen votes no. Councillor Weiss, how do you vote? Councillor Weiss votes yes. Councillor Kim is absent. Mayor Maracas, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mayor Maracas votes yes. Councillor Gallo, how do you vote? Councillor Gallo votes yes. That carries.
Thank you. Second item, 4.2.
The motion for the second item of the is that the confidential direction to staff be confirmed.
Someone like to move that? Councillor Gillan, seconder. Councillor Thompson. Comments, questions? Recorded vote.
A recorded vote has been requested for the second item of the council closed session this evening. Mayor Maracas, how do you vote?
Yes.
Councillor Weiss, how do you vote? Councillor Weiss votes yes. Councillor Kim is absent. Councillor Thompson, how do you vote? Councillor Thompson votes yes. Councillor Gardner was absent. Councillor Gallo, how do you vote? Councillor Gallo votes yes. Councillor Gillen, how do you vote? Councillor Gillen votes yes. That carries.
You confirm in bylaw. Councillor Gallo, second. Councillor Weiss, all those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Thompson, Councillor Weiss, all those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Madam Deputy Clerk, the time is 7:02. I'm going to call this general committee meeting to order. Council and members of the public, last week we lost an incredible person, Fire Chief Ian Laing. I'd just like to direct everyone's attention to the monitors, please. Thank you, Linda. Anyone that you, Chief Lang, is an incredible man that cared deeply, not only about both communities, town of Aurora and town of Newmarket, but cared deeply about the firefighters, every single one of them, as well as I think every member of our community. He did everything that he could do to ensure that we had one of the best fire services in the entire GTHA, if not the province. And so he's going to be deeply missed by, I think, everyone in our communities, as well as the entire fire family. So at this time, I'd ask if everyone could stand for a moment of silence. Thank you. Deputy Chief, thank you for coming this evening. Thank you. Town of Aurora acknowledges that the Anishinaabe lands on which we live and work are the traditional and treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island, as well as many other nations whose presence here continues to this day. As the closest First Nation community to Aurora, we recognize the special relationship the Chippewas have with the lands and waters of this territory. They are the water protectors and environmental stewards of these lands, and as a municipality, we join them in these responsibilities. We further acknowledge that Aurora is part of the treaty lands of the Mississaugas and Chippewas recognized through Treaty Number 13, as well as the Williams Treaties of 1923. Shared understanding of the rich cultural heritage that has existed for centuries and how our collective past has brought us to where we are today will help us walk together into a better future. Council, can I get a motion to approve the agenda, the added items? Councilor Thompson, second. Councilor Weiss. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. Community presentations, delegations. We have one, 6.1, Adam Layton on behalf of 1,254,559 Ontario Inc. in regards to Town of Aurora official plan review final draft. Mr. Layton, welcome. 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. My name is Adam Layton. I'm a principal with Evans Planning. We're here on behalf of a consortium of owners with respect to the lands located at 14094, 14108, and 14122 Yonge Street. We have had the chance to briefly review the draft OP that has been presented for adoption tonight. We did provide some comments on a prior draft of this. I think in general, without getting too into the details of what's contained in our letter that was provided, I think what we're looking to seek tonight, or at least hope to continue our discussions with staff about, is just that because of all the levels of interplay, particularly along the Yonge Street corridor, as one approaches Bloomington Road with the Yonge Street South Secondary Plan, we've noted that there are a few areas where I think the policy framework needs to be potentially tightened, or there's some potential conflicts. And so really what we're here tonight to ask is that the opportunity be taken to try and rectify these minor issues with staff through offline discussions in order to potentially avoid future applications that may otherwise be unnecessary, again, just due to policy inconsistencies or just oversights. Thank you. And that concludes my comments.
Thank you. Council, we have a motion to receive and refer. Councilor Thompson, Councilor Gardner. Any questions for the delegate? Councilor Gilliland.
Thank you, through Mr. Chair. You had said, I know you had sent a letter, but it was quite some time ago, and your delegation request came at the very last minute for us today. So if you wouldn't mind reminding council some of those policies that you felt needed to have some tweaking to rectify some of this development along Yonge Street, would be helpful to us.
Mr. Layton.
Certainly, through Your Worship to Councillor Gilliland. So our letter was provided on November 24th. We identified concerns with the overall town structure, in particularly the Yonge Street corridor policies, and the interplay between that policy and the more specific policies of the Yonge Street South Secondary Plan with respect to uses, densities, and things of that nature. Some changes potentially to the block plan requirements of the secondary plan, land use framework, urban design and sustainability policies, environmental designations, and as well as some of the implementation policies that are proposed in Section 18. And we'd be happy to share our letter more broadly with the clerk if that would help.
Councillor.
Thank you. Through Mr. Chair, you said you sent it November 24th of this year. Was it through the clerk or was it from a certain email? I'm just
to planning staff in response to the earlier November draft of the official plan.
Okay, I'll talk to staff and ask where that is, and thank you.
Any other questions for the delegate? Mr. Layton, thank you for coming. Thank you for your letter. I'll vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Consent agenda. 2 items. Someone like to move? We approve. Councilor Thompson. Councilor Weiss. Comments, questions? Call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed, that carries. Move to 9.1. This one's Town of Aurora official plan, final draft, consideration for adoption with a presentation to be provided by David Riley and Paul Lowe's from SGL Planning and Design Inc. Mr. Riley, welcome. You have 10 minutes, Mr. Riley, and you know the drill, and the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. First and foremost, my condolences for Fire Chief Laing. Just wanted to say that right off the bat. May I have the quick... So as we load up the presentation here, I'm just happy to be here today with all of you to it's been a long process, the official plan review, and here we are today with a recommendation to adopt the plan. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to do a short presentation to give you an update on particularly what we've been doing since the last time that I stood before you. We've had meetings and et cetera, but let's get going with the presentation. I'll just wait for it to load up here. Maybe I'll just start speaking a little bit to the first few slides as we do that. This is the overall a 5-phase official plan review, starting with the background review all the way to the 5th phase, which hasn't technically begun yet. It is the regional approval. So we're at the very end of phase 4 right now, which is actually the adoption of the official plan amendment. Which is really essentially, you can look at it as a new official plan, and the version that is on the agenda is a track change version. So anything that was from the existing official plan is struck out, and anything new is underlined. And we do have a clean version of this as well. But we do have to remember that, this was really an extensive engagement process, really starting right from the vision and the vision survey that really established, which I'll discuss on the next slide, what the people of Aurora are really looking for in their official plan. We've had many stakeholder meetings and focus group discussions, many public open houses, the community steering committee and the leadership team meetings that we've had. And then more recently, the public meeting, which was at the beginning of the summer. We've had many visits, thousands of visits to the project website. And of course, throughout it all, general committee and council meeting updates where I've had the opportunity to speak to all of you. But in my experience of doing these types of studies in other municipalities, I would say that Aurora was a very engaged community, or is a very engaged community, more so than many other municipalities that I've worked in before. So I think that's great, and it speaks to, I think, all the interesting things that are happening in Aurora. So let's do a brief overview of the final official plan. And really, I would just wanted to kind of highlight in this slide what some of the comments were that have come in. And since the release back in June, we've had frequent conversations and meetings up until last week, I think, or the week before, with the region, just going through really policy by policy, how this plan is conforming and consistent with provincial and regional policy, and just addressing changes here and there that needed to be done. And public transit policies, water resources policies, that's one of the new sections that you'll see in this version of the official plan. Updated housing policies and just schedule updates. The terminology is a little bit different in the Town of Aurora official plan than it is in the regional official plan for certain things. Like for an easy example is the regional official plan identifies a rural area generally for lands within Aurora that are outside of your urban boundary. These lands, of course, are the Oak Ridges Moraine lands, and that are part of the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan. And we, the town and in consultation with everyone, felt strongly that the designations in the Aurora official plan really should reflect the Oak Ridges Moraine designations, because that's what they are, and that's what everyone's familiar with here. So we've had many discussions with the region on how to kind of bridge that gap a little bit on how to make sure that the document, although it might not be exactly the same as the regions, it does conform to the regional official plan. Well, that's just one example of that kind of update. In terms of public comments, we've received many comments with great suggestions for improvements to certain text, clarifying policies to reduce ambiguity, other suggestions to reinforce the need to accommodate for intensification and affordable housing, encouraging transit supportive development, improvements to the natural heritage policies and mapping. Certainly these came right from many of the public comments. And as I said, mentioned, good suggestions on how to better integrate OPA 48, which is the Oak Ridges Moraine area of the town, with the policies and the intent of accommodating growth along the Yonge Street corridor. And the delegate tonight was referring to this issue, and speaking directly to that letter, we were able to make some updates. That letter plus some others, just to highlight that, yes, this is a regional corridor and there should be growth along the regional corridor along Yonge Street, but we have to balance that with the fact that it still is the Oak Ridges Moraine, and that there's a certain open space character that's important to the town and to maintain. So that's the way that we structured the policies and responded to those comments. Official plan review vision. So the whole official plan update was based, as I mentioned, on extensive consultation, very early input on really what are those important elements of Aurora's vision. Managing growth, preserving the environment, adaptation to climate change impacts, developing attainable and affordable housing, and facilitating diversity and inclusion, just to name a few. And I wanted to spend a bit of time tonight on the next few slides just to describe how the new OP addresses some of these matters, and what does the new OP do for housing? What does the OP do for environment? What does the new OP do for the economy? And how is the new OP innovative? So let's start with housing. The official plan focuses on the elements of the town structure, including the strategic growth areas. And there's a new schedule in the official plan, Schedule A, that is really identifying what are these elements of the town structure, which was not there in your current official plan. But it's important to really set the context of, where are the strategic growth areas, which include, of course, the promenade and the major transit station area, the regional corridor, and the local corridors. And we've added new policies and reinforced existing policies that these are the areas where we should be prioritizing growth at higher densities compared to those low density areas in town. And that's really reflective of the updated growth projections in the York Region Official Plan and provincial and regional policy. We've also added policies to promote and prioritize the provision of affordable housing. And we added enabling policies to the official plan for the development of a future community planning permit system, which you'll be hearing about more in the next little while. And this is because legislation in Ontario sets out that within protected major transit station areas, which is your Aurora GO station major transit station area that's on all the maps now, and or within a community planning permit system, there's legislation that the town will be able to require a certain amount, and it's stipulated in the legislation, affordable housing to be provided. So this is kind of the next step in implementation on how to realize affordable housing. And it starts with, in the case of community planning permit system, those enabling policies in the official plan. Also, what it does for housing is that it within the lower density residential areas, and we received a lot of feedback, and the town has done a lot of work on stable neighborhoods in the past. So it was certainly something that we had to recognize, that you do have these low density residential areas which are part of the town, but it's important to think about reinforcing the idea of gentle intensification and gentle density within neighborhoods, so that you make sure that this intensification, or this type of intensification, is compatible with existing densities and character of neighborhoods. So that includes additional dwelling units, where three units, so 2 additional dwelling units, can be located on every property. and also permitting denser forms of housing on the edges of stable neighborhoods. And we call those edge sites where, you know, you might have up to maybe 4 stories or a little bit more dense development, kind of still low rise, but there's an appropriate transition in terms of density and height and mass. With respect to the environment, several things. There's an elevated and more prominent focus on climate change through the official plan. You know, many of those policies are reflected in the design policy, the environmental policies, the infrastructure policies. We've got new policies on urban forestry. We have better alignment of the environmental policies with the provincial environmental policies and the regional environmental policies. And we've simplified the green developments. I think that means I'm probably taking too long, but I'm almost finished here. Simplification of the green development standards.
Just, Mr. Riley, just 1 sec, extra 5
Yep.
minutes. Councillor Thompson, Councillor Gardner, all those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Mr. Riley, go ahead.
Thank you all. Sorry. So really just simplifying it so that the town can actually go and update your green development standards without an official plan amendment. So that was the idea of, although we removed those detailed policies, it was really important to do that so that you can keep up with emerging technologies without having to do an OPA every time something new comes along. With the respect to the economy, there's updated criteria to consider conversions of employment lands. We simplified the land use designations. So there were more different types of designations for employment areas, which we've simplified. So no longer distinguishing between what's a greenfield employment area versus an employment area that's within the built up area. They're both employment areas, and we've simplified that. We've brought many of the land use designations from the secondary plans into the parent document, including the mixed use designation. And this is really, you know, getting at those at-grade commercial uses and really that mix of uses that makes neighborhoods so great. And lastly, how is the OP innovative? And for this, other than everything that we've just gone over, there's now town-wide design policies in your new official plan, rather than just specific areas that are subject or specific to certain secondary plans. There's a new focus on placemaking, and this is really building on what Aurora is already doing with Town Park and Town Square, but really recognizing this concept of planning for public uses and destinations and making sure that there's connections throughout the town to those destinations. And that's really what we mean when we say made in Aurora approach. There was such significant public and stakeholder engagement in this process that we really do believe that it did form where we're at today in terms of the product. So the next steps is the town council adoption, of course, and then it's off to the region for regional review and approval. And I just want to take the opportunity. I'm sure there will be some questions, but just to thank you all for the opportunity to work with you. It's been amazing working with town staff and all the various committees and all of you on council as well, who have been very much engaged throughout the whole process and giving us amazing feedback throughout. So thank you all very much, and everyone from the public that's provided comments.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. Council, the recommendations that report number PDS 23-152 be received. 2, that the final draft official plan be adopted. 3, that an adopting bylaw be brought forward at a future council meeting in January. 4, that staff forward the adopted official plan to York Region for final approval. 5, that should portions of the official plan be appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal, council authorize town staff to appear before the tribunal, and the hiring of external legal counsel and experts as required to support the position of the town before the tribunal hearing. Would someone like to move the recommendations? Mr. Thompson, seconder. No seconder. Pardon? Do you want to move something? We can vote on them separately if you want to. You guys want to just receive it at this point, and then we're going to wordsmith everything. All right. Mover to receive, seconder. Councilor Gallo, thank you. Councilor Thompson, go ahead.
To the presenter, if you don't mind coming back to the podium. sorry, was it Ryan?
David.
David, sorry. David, thank you for your presentation. You touched on it just at the end of your comments with regards to the Made in Aurora approach. I was wondering if you could perhaps expand upon it and talk about that in a broader context about, you know, how we were able to adopt some of the community's views into the official plan.
Mr. Riley?
Great suggestion. So in developing an official plan or any policy document, or even when you're talking at the zoning level, there's always such a broad spectrum of ideas, opinions, and many of which are contradictory to one another. A simple example of that is someone saying, I want density, we should be permitting everything everywhere. And those that prefer the opposite, we need to protect and maintain the character of our low-rise neighborhoods. In Aurora, what's unique to Aurora and some other municipalities with respect to density is that you've done some detailed work with respect to your low-rise areas and protecting the character of stable neighborhoods. What came out of that were some, new policies, some regulations that really put into place, okay, what's allowed there. We're now in a world where, as of right, municipalities have to permit additional dwelling units, up to 2 additional dwelling units on every property. And that on its own is going to change the character. And Aurora understood that. And when I say Aurora, I mean everyone, the council, the community members, that, you know, we do need to accommodate that. And where we ended up in terms of the idea of the edges of neighborhoods, for example, along collector and arterial roads, where we might permit some increased densities that are where there are certain criteria that can be met in terms of meeting that transition and that, an appropriate transition in terms of scale and density to those lower rise areas. That was almost like a compromise that everyone met to say, okay, we do need to think about this. Yes, we are looking at density in our strategic growth areas and along the promenade and the major transit station area. But everyone is, doing their part in understanding that density is needing to be accommodated, and we need to spread that out everywhere. But also we can recognize that there are certain elements of character that are desired to be maintained. So it was, when I say made in Aurora, it's, people can have different views and different opinions, but we can all arrive at good solutions that I think are good for everyone. And that's just one example of density. Certainly the design policies being brought out in kind of a town-wide approach, that's a little bit unique. There are some official plans that do that, but not all. Some don't really address design that much. It's nice that there was a willingness to bring out those elements of character that were defined by the public, and being able to kind of build on what you already had for some of your secondary plan areas and apply that on a town-wide scale.
Councillor?
Thank you again, through you. You spoke a bit about engagement and just based on your experience in going through this process, not just with the town of Aurora, but with other municipalities in your experience, how would you characterize the engagement with the community and various stakeholders as fair, good, in comparison to what you've seen in the past?
Mr. Riley?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Thompson, excellent, I would say. Particularly when we started the engagement, when everything was just virtual, it was a little bit of an unusual time for everybody in that way. Before we had like all in-person open houses for another projects, and if you got 10 people, that might be a good thing. Certainly here we had a lot more than that in our in-person ones, and the virtual ones were very well attended. But even just the survey responses, you go back to that, very engaged. There's one municipality I'm working in now, which is the town of the Blue Mountains, where they're extremely engaged as well. Them and you guys, other than like, definitely by far more than anywhere else that I've worked.
Councillor?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Reese?
Thank you. First, I'd like to reiterate that it's important to thank all the residents who have participated so much over this 4-year span. So I didn't want it to go unnoticed. You said it, and Councillor Thompson has said the same thing. So I want to thank everybody who's come forward to give their opinions. I really like the changes that have made, and even the changes that have made since the last time we met. And you know, with respect to comments made by the Conservation Authority, they've been put in, water and aggregate policies, et cetera. One thing I did notice, though, is a change in employment land to residential along the Leslie and Wellington Street corridor. And it struck me that having a housing pledge that is designed to increase the amount of housing that we have in appropriate areas, that I just wondered if that area shouldn't be identified as a secondary plan, because, and when you talked about looking forward to 2051 and where growth is going to occur, I mean, density and growth could be identified out there. So the rationale for this, I'm sure, is because there's recreation there, there's access to the GO station out at the 404, the Kiss and Ride, the 404 itself. It's a regional road. So I just think it's a great place for us to start thinking about moving it from a certain density to other densities. And so I believe we should be looking at our zoning. So we move from allowing a maximum of height and density to consider some places like this corridor. So we should be encouraging the density, but we haven't talked about minimums. We've talked about maximums. And my question really could be to Mr. Ramuno about whether it's a good planning exercise to start looking at minimum heights as opposed to maximum heights, to make sure that there are areas that can appropriately be intensified, where height and density could be put as a minimum. So for example, recently we saw somebody, an applicant come forward in my ward in Aurora, and it was a stacked townhouses, and I believe they could have gone significantly higher. And I'm wondering if if it's good planning or planning at all for us to start looking at minimum heights in some of these appropriate areas where density would be useful. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Ramuno, is that good planning to consider that we want to have minimum numbers and minimum density and height in certain areas?
Mr. Ramuno, I believe, and I believe she can add me wrong, but we do have minimums in certain areas, and I think we've encouraged that in a lot of our areas that we've looked for higher density. But Mr. Ramuno,
through you, Mr. Mayor, Councilor Weiss. So we think the plan before council is based on, good, strong planning principles. I think you need to be a little careful with respect to minimums, because that really means if you need a maximum, otherwise it's the sky's the limit. So dating back to our original plan in 2010, we included minimums, 2-story minimums along the Yonge Street corridor, really just because the intent there was we wanted to see some intensification. So at least 2 and up to maximums of 5 or 6. So what we've done in this plan is really carry over the majority of that height framework from the previous plan. We've done some expansions. We've got a major transit station area where throughout our 4 years of public consultation, community, this council felt, and staff as well, and our consultants, that the current height framework being a maximum is appropriate in our community. Again, I just caution that if you go the route of minimums, we saw what the provincial mod imposed on one site was a minimum, which meant, the sky's the limit. So I think in a community of our size, our character, the policy framework, which as we laid out, identifies maximums, is appropriate. There's always room for, there's always opportunities for applicants to come in with, if they've got a plan that doesn't conform, they can come in with an amendment to our official plan, and that's typical for the process. There's policies in our official plan that allow for amendments to come forward, and we will consider them at that time. But I think the plan we've put in front of council, based on the policy framework, specifically the height, is based on good planning, and it's appropriate for our community.
Thank you.
Councillor.
That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Well, first of all, thank you for your work. I don't know how many hours you spent and how many years, but I have some comments. The first one would be about public engagement. So we did have in the intent, we know that the public was very concerned about the environment. I attended some of the meetings. And I think in the first public engagement, 44% included environment and climate change. And also on the Engage Aurora platform, it was a big topic. Yet in the vision statement, we don't have protection of the natural environment. And to me, that just doesn't seem right. It uses sustainability and promoting. And certainly they're not the same as protection. So I'd like to suggest that we add that word back in. Do I need to make an amendment, Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Riley?
I'm just pulling the vision in front of me right now.
Thank you.
So so there's a new paragraph that was added, although from the first paragraph at the very end, the "and protects the town's natural environment and historic character" was crossed out. The last paragraph that was added, which is entirely new text, says, "To enhance the quality of life of current residents and to welcome the future residents of Aurora, growth will be managed in a way that preserves the town's natural features and complements its overall character." And then it is envisioned that Aurora will continue to value its historic charm while celebrating the current and future culture and diversity of the community. So it's worded a little bit differently, but I would say that the intent is there.
Councillor?
Thank you. To me, the intent isn't good having the intent there because we know that our residents are very interested in protection of the environment. And that was is in ROP until we pass the new one. So I think it's more than appropriate that it go back into the statement. So do I need to make an amendment, Mr. Mayor? I would like, it's a vision statement to me. It is, it's our very first thing. It says what our OP is about. I would like to have protection of the natural environment included in that. I need a seconder for that.
Mm-hmm.
Councillor Gilliland is seconding.
I'll pick the seconder, Councillor. Councillor Gilliland? Thank you. Go ahead.
I've said everything I have to say about that.
Thank you. Anybody to the amendments? Are those all to the amendment that are up there? No, okay. Councillor Thompson.
To Councillor Gardner, if there are other lines that you're going to reference, is it possible that we could do all of them as one amendment, or would you prefer to go through each line and make separate amendments for them all? Because I'm just curious whether this is the only change you're looking to make, because we're only on page 2, or whether you have further changes that you'd like to put forward to council, in which case, rather than going through each individual amendments, maybe we can consider doing it as an omni amendment.
Councillor?
So Thompson, I have a few, but considering we've been discussing public engagement and how strong it is in Aurora, and the public engagement was very strong about protecting the environment, I think we should just do it now. Vote yes or no now.
Any other comments, questions to the amendment? We get it on the screen. Any comments or questions? Call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Back to the main motion. Councillor Gardner, floor is still yours.
Could you, all the different set headings of the Oak Ridges Marine are in here except settlement. So there's no section on the settlement area of the Marine.
Mr. Riley?
So the way the Oak Ridges Marine plan is structured is that if you're within a settlement area, the policies of the local municipal plan will apply. So you have very detailed policies with respect to you know, for example, the secondary plan that applies to 34 at the south. Yeah. And those secondary plan land use designations are still in effect. Where we've brought in the policies are the lands that are outside of the settlement area. So rather than just calling them rural, we brought in those environmental protection area, the linkages, and the Oak Ridges Marine Countryside designations. So the settlement designation within the Oak Ridges Moraine just refers back to the local official plan. So there's no need for that designation.
Council?
Thank you. Under 12.3 environmental protection designation, in that section under intent, it does say in Appendix 3, it says in Appendix 3 that we have no intention of putting any stormwater management facilities into an environmental feature. And when I'm looking at intent, it isn't clear to me. It's just says appropriate located stormwater management facilities. So could that be clarified that they're not allowed in the feature itself, only in the buffers?
Is that a question, Councillor?
That's a question.
Through the chair, please.
Oh, through you. Sorry, Mr.
Thank
Mayor.
you.
Through you,
Mr.
Mr.
Riley?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardner. So that is, I believe that is spelled out in the policies. So in the permitted uses, so 12.3.2, subsection 6, so Roman numeral 6, stormwater pond outlets, retrofits of existing stormwater management works and low impact development works, stormwater management works may be permitted in the buffers to natural heritage features at the discretion of the town.
Councillor?
So appropriate would refer to section, would refer to section 6.
Is that a question, Councillor?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor. To me, the word appropriate is, it's just open. So would it be possible to put that in there, or some wording that suggests that the key natural heritage features are off limit for stormwater management ponds?
Mr. Riley?
Through you, Councillor Gardner, to through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardner. The intent section isn't meant to be worded as a policy itself. The intent is really setting out what's included in the section. And the policies themselves do not permit stormwater management facilities within the feature. So I think it's covered.
Councillor?
Thank you. What's your definition of affordable?
Is that a question, Councillor?
Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Riley?
So we have the definitions. I'm just going to pull them up in here.
Is it the same definition the region uses?
Yes.
Councillor?
So I will quote somebody who's in the know, who said, we will never have affordable housing in Aurora. Do you see the possibility of affordable housing? I mean, even basement apartments are going for more than $2,000 a month.
Mr.
Is that
Riley?
a fair question, Mr. Mayor? To
Mr. Riley?
For you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardner, I hear what you're saying, and I share your concern that, you know, the things are difficult right now. And I think that what Aurora is doing through this official plan is, setting kind of the foundation for further work. Part of that work is going to be the implementation of a community planning permit system in the Aurora Promenade, where you'll be able to actually leverage affordable housing from developments. Another tool that is available, because it is a protected major transit station area, is inclusionary zoning. So it's just, I do think that I will say I'm optimistic that yes, there will be affordable housing in Aurora.
Council, do you have a definition, Council?
Pardon us, we're using the same one as in the region's definition.
Do you have a definition?
25% of monthly should only include 25%, whether it's rental or owned. But through you, Mr. Mayor, I do remember you sitting here and I asked you I think it was you, if in the major transit areas, if we were going to get some more affordable housing, which is what the provincial policy says. And the response was, well, it's up to the developers. So if they don't want to build it, we can't make them. Is that basically correct?
Mr. Riley?
So there is a target, I believe it's 35% without having the policy in front of me. Yes. And of that many, 35% of new units within the major transit station area to be affordable. We know that for inclusionary zoning, for example, the province has recently capped what municipalities can ask, and through legislation, I think it's at 10% of units, which is definitely lower than the 35%. So in terms of beyond that legislative requirement, it is certainly something that I think many municipalities are struggling with on how to realize affordable housing. And it is in that case up to landowners and developers to provide it beyond what can actually be required.
Councillor?
Thank you. Well, I'll be optimistic as well then. I know you said that when you were preparing this, you referred to the Natural Heritage Reference Manual. And in that manual, it's talking about unevaluated wetlands. We do speak about unevaluated wetlands, but the quote from the manual is, the planning authority should ensure that these are mapped and identified as part of the EIS. I don't see that anywhere in our official plan.
Councillor, that question?
Through you, Mr. I'm really sorry.
Thank you. Mr. Riley?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardner, I'm just going to scroll to the section of the environmental protection designation. G. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you. 12.4. 12.3.3G. Yeah, so there's a few different policies within 12.3.3, which are the policies of the environmental protection designation, where there will be a requirement. So if there is a greenfield development, for example, this is typically where you're going to find unmapped natural features. There's very few of those sites left in Aurora these days, but an environmental impact statement would be required. And the environmental impact statement would be required to identify the feature and identify what the appropriate buffer is to that feature. And that would include any identified and unevaluated wetlands.
Thank you.
Councillor?
Through Mr. Mayor, and that is true, but that is not what the Natural Heritage Reference Manuals, says that the planning authority should do it, not leave it up to developers, because of course they have vested interest. I mean, the more land they can use, the higher the profitability. So I'm guessing that's why the manual is suggesting that we do that.
Mr. Riley?
Through you.
Thank you.
Mayor, Councillor Gardner. So there already has been mapping of the features that could be identified kind of at a high level by the region, as well as a more detailed look by the town's environmental consultant, North South Environmental. So from our perspective, whatever is there has been identified, but the policy then, I don't believe the town can go out and do a EIS level detail report on all over the town. So it does rely on the process. And in the town's review of those applications and those detailed studies, I think that is how that reference to the Natural Heritage Manual can be implemented.
Thank you, through Mr. Mayor. But there's a difference between a developer doing an EIS, a detailed EIS, and the town doing it. So will the developer's EIS be reviewed by the town? Is that the intention?
Mr. Romano?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I can just add to that. So the preparation of environmental reports are a requirement of our complete applications. So if a zoning application or development application is submitted, we sit down as part of our pre-consultation meeting, and we can require those reports to be prepared as part of the planning application submission. Yes, they are prepared by the applicant's qualified environmental consultant. We receive those reports. Staff reviews those as well, but we don't necessarily have the same expertise. But we then retain a third-party environmental consultant to review those on our behalf. As you recall, in the past, that was done by the Conservation Authority. It is still reviewed by Conservation Authority if there's a development adjacent to a wetland or some other significant feature. But if it's related to green natural heritage system, we retain an environmental consultant to peer review the applicant's original report.
Just through Mr. Mayor, just for clarification, did you say that the town would hire someone to peer review that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have been doing that, and we always will be doing that. Yes.
Thank you.
Councilor.
My 5 minutes. Oh, do I get 10?
10, you're at 8 right now. So you got another.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I was looking at the chart, and the chart of the buffers, and the environmental features that are in the Oak Ridges Moraine have a definite buffer area. The ones that are outside don't. And I would like to say that the environmental features outside of the Oak Ridges Moraine are very important. So why not put the buffer in there for these features?
That question, Council.
That's a question through you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Riley.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Gardner. So this table, as I'm sure you're aware, is directly from the regional official plan. So we're conforming directly to what's there. To answer your question, when it comes to lands within the Oak Ridges Moraine, there's no wiggle room there. That's actually set out in the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan. But in practice, I do think that there definitely is opportunity to reduce those buffers from what is there, and it's based on a site-by-site analysis that's determined through an environmental impact statement. I have seen, just professionally in my experience, many examples where a reduced buffer is appropriate, and so the official plan, in my opinion, is absolutely appropriate to have the policy written the way that it is.
Councilor.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure. I'm saying that these if it's let's say it's a seepage area or a spring, so that's pure fresh water that's coming up, and the wildlife need that. So it doesn't really matter if it's within the Oak Ridges Moraine or if it's in an environmental protection zone. The water should be protected equally. I did say through you, Mr.
You
Mayor.
did, but I was still confused if that was a question. But Mr. Riley.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Gardner. So there are individual characteristics to seepage areas and springs. Maybe on a wider feature, a wider buffer may be warranted. where, you know, so I do, just to reiterate, I do think that it's important to have that flexibility there,
Counselor?
supported by a study, of course.
Counselor?
I'm sorry, I didn't get, through you, Mr. Mayor, I didn't get the last few words. If I think it's important to have, then what?
The flexibility, if there is if a 30-meter buffer, for example, was, you know, could be reduced from a functional perspective to that feature, then I think that it should be considered.
Counselor? 10 seconds left.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so I'm not sure I'm reading the chart right. So if in the Oak Ridges Moraine, for the spring, it's 30 meters. And then if it's outside, it says determined by an EIS. So it could be reduced. I'm not trying to reduce it. I'm trying to keep it the same or increase it. So in an EIS, it could be reduced, but in fact, it's the same importance as in the moraine. Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Riley?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Gardner, and again, I would just say that it's studied on an individual feature by feature basis. It could be that a larger setback would be required. Could be that a smaller setback would be required, or I'm saying setback, vegetation protection zone. And if it's supported by an environmental impact study and peer reviewed, as Mr. Romano was saying, then the number is just a number. It's, you know, it's a requirement in the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan, but I think it's good planning to have it written the way that it is.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
I think
No. You had 3 minutes before the amendment you'd already done. So together you're at 10 and a half. You're welcome. Any other comments or questions? No, I'm saying she had 3 minutes before the amendment. That's why it was 10 in total. You were up and disappeared when it came back. So I wasn't sure if you're Councilor Gallo, go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks for all of your work. I think a 4-year endeavor. Speaking of 4 years, and I'm going to try to keep it relatively high level. A lot has changed. I'm sure you would agree in the revolving around exactly what we're doing right here, particularly in terms of housing and density and provincial mandates. Has the plan been filtered through the significant changes that have happened so that it protects us to a certain degree, obviously, that, you know, in my experience throughout the years, particularly lately, when we deviate from developers' wishes, very quick to go to the board, and the board is what it is, and then we end up negotiating, and things happen, particularly outside of the public realm, which I'm trying very hard to stay away from. Is this, in your opinion, has it changed enough as policies have changed to be able to defend it and not always go through that process that unfortunately we've seen a little too often, in my opinion? Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Riley?
To Councilor Gallo, I would say yes. You know, we've gone through just as you say, things have changed enormously in the last little while. Last 4 years, the last 6 months, you know, it's a bit crazy. And we've had so many great conversations with the region, who has been a really good resource for our team in terms of having that understanding of, you know, where things are coming at in the province, what other municipalities in New York region are doing. And we've been able to kind of change policies where needed to keep up with a lot of those changes. So from that perspective, I think we're strong. I would say overall the policy is definitely you know, or all of the policies in the official plan are defensible at the OLT, and that's just proven by all of the extensive consultation that we've gone through in this process, the background studies, the many checkpoints with council and various stakeholders. I do think that it will stand up, and in certain respects, the plan has changed to be a little bit more flexible, to help achieve some of the goals. For example, 4 stories along local corridors or 5 stories along the regional corridor. That's a change. I think a necessary change to accommodate a certain level of increased density. So it recognizes that balance, that the town of Aurora is recognizing that we know we're growing, but we've really thought hard and long and hard about where that growth is appropriate. And this is what it looks like.
Counselor.
My concern continues to be density and height, that I believe we're going to be challenged based on the draft that's before us. I think that's inevitable. Have we taken that into consideration so that we can have quality conversations around this table in the public realm versus behind closed doors and negotiating? Have we taken a very strong, hard look at those issues, particularly around the transportation corridor? Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Riley.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gallo, I would say yes. We have taken that strong, hard look. I definitely can't say that there won't be any applications coming in for taller buildings. I mean, that's probably going to happen. But we heard loud and clear from many in the community that the 7 stories was really the limit. That we heard were the majority of people, I would say, that have let us know that this is where we're comfortable, and this is where we're comfortable having 7 stories. And I think that says something. And we've looked at, okay, we know that this many people, this many jobs are coming. Can we accommodate that in the 7 stories where we've said that we can have 7 stories? And the answer is yes, you can absolutely accommodate it. And so we've gone through all of that. I think you will probably have some examples of applications coming in and challenge that in certain levels, and all of those applications will have to be assessed in relation to now your new updated official plan, which has reinforced through a very public process what that maximum height should be. So I think it puts you in a good position.
Counselor.
Thank you.
Counselor Gilliland.
Thank you. Just quick comments. I were similar to Councillor Gallo about the height. You were talking about how the local corridor and the regional corridors were some changes. I believe 4-story and 5-story. And I guess that's where I can agree to disagree. And I think I've said this before, to where I feel like if there is any opportunity to have increased heights, it would be along those major corridors, because there is transportation and busing and you have access to a lot of services. So my concern is down the road, if we're actually looking at that vision down the road, are we actually giving enough leeway to developers to develop and provide affordable housing choices, especially when we have such limitations? So through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Riley, do you see that there's opportunity along these local corridors at that restrictive 4-story to encourage affordable housing?
Mr. Riley.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gilliland. Yes, absolutely. Within a 4 or 5-story maximum height, you can accommodate a variety of built forms. It can be townhouses, stacked townhouses, low-rise apartment buildings, walk-ups, duplex, triplex, quadruplex, basically all building types except for a tall building. You can achieve pretty significant densities even at a 4 or 5-story maximum height. You can also build those buildings out of wood. I think you can go up to 8 stories out of wood too. And parking is a consideration too. The more you have height, the more parking you need. And, there's a lot of debate on Toronto, for example, no more minimum parking requirements. But I'm involved in other development applications in other municipalities where a very tall building has been permitted, and now the developer, it's the desire for parking, even though it's not required, is still there outside of Toronto proper. And they're having a real hard time marketing units without parking spaces. And so that's a real consideration. It's very expensive to build underground parking. If you're doing surface parking, there's, that in a way might be a good transition to the lower density areas, but you're limited into how much parking you can provide and how much height you can provide. I think, in my opinion, the 4 or 5 story maximum is appropriate now. Who knows, that might change down the road in the next official plan review when the conditions are a little bit different. Right now, this, in my opinion, is good, recognizing that there are other areas in the town that can accommodate up to 7 stories and even denser developments. And potentially when the town goes through their zoning bylaw, you're going to look at those parking standards in more detail, given that you're so close to those transit opportunities right in the major transit station area. So I would say that this is a big change for the town, and I think it's a good one.
Council.
Thank you. Okay, as far as 5-story and affordability, I guess we could stand on 2 different opinions with that. I'm not so sure that developers can achieve affordable housing at those lower levels. And if we are going to be doing stacked townhomes, I would imagine they would be at least a minimum $1.2 million. So I guess it's just a difference of opinion in that. I wouldn't want to compare what I think we're trying to achieve as far as parking to Toronto proper. The transit system obviously is a lot different. I think we're trying to achieve a lot more transportation, especially around the regional and local corridors. I think that's the goal of the region. And I would like to look forward when we are developing that, we're developing with that in mind, as opposed to, shoving a low-rise building off the beaten path versus on a local corridor. And I just foresee and I worry that, again, we're going to have a lot of these development plans coming back to us in closed session or going to the board and appealing. It's end up costing the town even more taxpayer money because of all the legal pushback on that. I know that we have a lot of 7 stories already, and it's already prevalent in other areas outside of what's being presented. And I do see here on Schedule D2 that although you've mentioned 7 stories and you've reached out to the public and they said they can, take that 7 story, really it's only on the one side of the major GO station, the very north of the promenade and the very south of the promenade. But yet I don't think there's been any changes on any intensification in the downtown core, which still remains at 5 stories. All I'm suggesting is that, are we being broad enough on the local and regional corridors if we're going to spread out? And I say this because we do have a housing target. We do have a housing crisis. I know when I knocked on doors, so many people, lots of change in the last 12 months since you've started this process, but it's also our duty to give more options to incentivize developers to want to come in and intensify. We're having problems putting shovels in the ground. We have a lot of approved projects. Yeah, we can sit here and say we're going to meet these targets, but they're not moving. And a lot of them are lower stories. And I don't know why is that. I have no idea. And so are we just going to sit and wait on those properties until it happens? Or are we going to take advantage of some of the other corridors that are actually waiting in the wings that want to start developing and putting the shovels in the ground? For me, this just creates a lot more bureaucracy that we're trying to eliminate. And that's why I think we should be looking at identifying some minimums more so outside of this area. So through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Ramuno, I did notice on the pending list that in progress is the Affordable Housing Action Plan. And that's supposed to follow the official plan update. And, while I think this is a great idea, for me, it seems a little bit backwards to be doing this action plan after we adopt the official plan. Specifically, it says in here how to address the affordable housing and promote attainable options. And that the action plan also includes specific monitoring, measuring tools to ensure that successful implementation and strategies over the horizon of 2051 and beyond. This is a long-term vision. This is just not in the next 10 years. So why are we not focusing on making sure that this is done first? So if we are going to identify areas to where there's affordable housing, because we haven't really addressed that, and if it's not in the opportunity in the promenade area, shouldn't we be looking in the regional corridor? Shouldn't we be looking in the local corridors now and identifying using that tool? I think that should for sure include some at least minimum heights. I've seen a couple developments already, one on Wellington and one on Aurora, where I'd suggest that there's a great opportunity for height, but yet we're stacked townhomes. Why? It's a great opportunity for height. So through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Ramuno, why are we waiting for this housing action plan to be drafted after the OP?
Mr. Ramono?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I mean, this is a proper process. Number one, you need their policies in place first to set the framework, and then we'll follow up with, the action plan. We've already got some of those tools in place, through motions of council with respect to looking at reducing parking standards or actually pre-zoning some of these intensification corridors. So I think, as David mentioned, I think we've got, as part of our consultation process, this is what we've heard over the past 4 years. It's not saying we're not going to get, we may receive appeals. I'm not sure that there is an official plan passed by a municipality that hasn't received appeals. If you recall back in 2010, when I was here, when we did our first OP update to conform to the new provincial growth plan, we probably had a handful of appeals, very minor. It's also a testament to the fact that, as part of, after a 4-year consultation process, we've received a number of letters from consultants and landowners wanting clarification. Some are looking for changes in land use, but I mean, it is a testament that we've got the one speaker, one delegate here who's representing a landowner who we've met with over the past month or so, who has property on Yonge Street. They're satisfied with the 5-story height limit. They just want some clarity with respect to some of the other policies, the underlying policies within the secondary plan vis-a-vis the new updated plan. So, as David mentioned, I think we've conducted an extensive consultation process. We think it's a reasonable plan. It's balanced. And as you heard David before, and I think Councillor Gallo brought it up, it's a defendable plan. It's not to say that we're not going to be in a situation where down the road we may get an amendment to the official plan, but that's just part of the process as well. And as well, as David mentioned, we'll be updating this plan over the next 5 or 10 years, and we can make adjustments if needed as things evolve. But as it stands now, what we've presented to council, we think it's a balanced and reasonable plan, specifically with respect to the height permissions and policies around build form in our strategic growth areas.
Councillor?
Thank you. So I guess the question was, with the affordable action plan, is there a reason why we couldn't develop that or have something presented to allow us to understand where we would identify those areas prior to adopting the official plan? Because we are really talking specifically about heights in certain areas, and we're being very specific where those opportunities are. So is there a reason why that we don't have an action plan before us prior to making these decisions?
Mr. Mayor, again, just to be clear, I mean, you need an official plan to establish the land use plan, the densities and policies to permit that type of development. I mean, the action plan is not a land use plan. It's not an official plan. It's really just going to provide some guidance moving forward with respect to how can we achieve how can we accelerate some of our targets, right? What are other things that we can do? And I think we've heard about some of them with respect to, community planning permit system. Do we want to start pre-zoning some areas? And again, we've already received direction from council, but this is a proper process. We need to come up with our land use plan with respect to identifying those growth areas. Then we work on sort of how do we get there? And again, it's really, development industry, there's a lot of interest. As council is aware, we've dealt with a number of approvals over the past number of months with respect to, mid-rise projects within our transit station area.
Councillor?
Thank you. And I appreciate that comment. And I do appreciate that there is some interest to be developing in and around the major transit area. I agree with that. And again, I think I've been quite vocal again across the regional and local corridors that we identify some areas where we think it'd be appropriate. I think we can all agree that within the promenade area, it is a lot of infill development and things required to be torn down and rebuilt. We do have some land that is vacant, that has opportunity, that could get a shovel in the ground a lot sooner. And I think it would be responsible for us to think about these opportunities and how quickly we can incentivize in areas that we can identify that would be appropriate for this kind of intensification. Mr. Riley did speak about the public engagement, and some of the main comments were transit supportive development. So obviously that's something we really want to encourage. And I would assume along those regional and local corridors makes sense. And also intensification and affordability was also top of mind. So I do think Aurora is a very engaged community, and we do care about our official plan. And height has really been, I would say, a sticking point in a lot of areas. But I think people in Aurora have also come to terms that there's got to be a happy medium somewhere. And if it isn't all in the promenade area where we're going to intensify in the MTSA, where else outside of that doesn't make sense? And I understand we have that 4 and 5, but I do see there's probably some other opportunity outside of that, just because there's evidence of it already existing on some of the local corridors already. So I don't know why we wouldn't try and streamline this process a little bit more to avoid this bureaucracy. That's where I stand today, and that's my comments.
Any other comments or questions? Councilor Gardner, second time.
I just wonder, Mr. Mayor, are we going to be discussing site-specific policy 57 separately, or is that going to be part of the OP?
Mr. Romano?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So that site-specific policy 57 represents the 1289 Wellington, the southwest corner of Leslie and Wellington. So as part of our OP update, we've identified the proper land use and height for that property. And that's really in response to, I guess it was this time last year, November, where council enacted an interim control bylaw. And we were going to undertake the review of that site as part of this OP. And so what's in front of you is a site-specific policy and the land use schedule, where staff and consultants have looked at that site in connection with what the appropriate land use and height should be, and we've proposed to designate it as a medium to high density residential with a maximum height of 7 stories. As you know, the regional official plan, they went through their review. These lands were at one time employment lands. They have been removed from the regional from the regional plan as employment, and now it's before council as part of this plan. If it's adopted by council, those lands will at a local level be designated from business park to a medium density residential uses up to a maximum of 7 stories.
Councilor?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Romano. I'm just going to quote something you said on June 21st, 2022. My suggestion, though, is notwithstanding the regional OP and their employment land conversion policies, that the mapping at our local level should reflect the employment uses until this council deals with site-specific applications. So it's not mapped as employment land. In the first draft, it was mapped as employment land, and then somehow in the space of 6 months, it became urban residential, and it never went through the MCR process, and it never went through a review process by this council to look at the pros and the cons of converting this to residential. I mean, maybe its highest and best use is residential, but council never went through that process. Staff may have gone through it, but council didn't. So we don't know what the highest and best use is. And the only way I can think the region changed it from employment to residential was because of the letter Mr. Waters wrote. And he said that the town requests these lands not be mapped as regionally significant employment land. But that the council never even discussed that. So to have a site-specific policy in front of us at an OP and not at an OP meeting and not have had any discussion at council, I mean, this isn't the appropriate time to discuss the whole what would be in the whole process of the pros and cons. So I mean, you will give me an answer, but I'm saying to council that this is highly inappropriate. This land never went through an MCR or any discussion at council. We never had it on an agenda before it came to public planning.
Councillor, I'll let Mr. Romano go, but it did go through the proper process at the region. We discussed this here. I actually asked each and every one of you, any one of you that is concerned, to show up to the region at that meeting and delegate, and not one person showed up. Mr. Romano?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So just to be clear, I mean, it's our opinion that it did go through the regional municipal comprehensive review. Their plan, and we need to comply with their plan, shows it as community area, which permits residential, retail, institutional uses. It's not an employment area under the regional plan. If you recall, we did undertake a interim control bylaw. It's an extreme measure, and that was in response to the provincial modification to the regional plan, which identified this for a higher density. The province has since introduced Bill 150, and they're looking at reversing those. So I want to be careful. I don't want to get into too much debate here, because I think it's public knowledge that there's a Ontario Land Tribunal hearing on this parcel in this application early February or end of February. So we'll have discussions with council at a later date about that. But again, we were clear when we proposed the interim control bylaw that we would study this site and the appropriate land uses as part of the official plan review. So we've gone through a comprehensive process where staff and our consultants in the region have looked at the appropriate land use designation. That's what's before council. It's ultimately up to council. It's your prerogative to decide what you want to do with any policy within this plan or any parcel. But our advice is, as stated in the plan, that the appropriate land use for that particular site, as spelled out in the site-specific policy 57, is the medium to high density development with a height of up to 7. But again, just, that's putting that aside. We do have a board hearing that will commence the end of February on that particular application.
Councillor?
I really don't know where to begin. Mr. Mayor, it's you invited us to the region, but that's really not part of our process. Our process is to have it at the council table. With
Councillor, I'm just going to try. It's here right now. You can make a change if you want. No one's stopping you.
I'll hear what council, and as I said, it may be the best use for it to be employment, but we've never discussed it. We've never had a report on this, which I think we deserve to have. I'll just wait till what Councillor Gallo has to say.
So you're giving up your second sit for your second time?
Okay, I put forward an amendment that this that the site-specific policy not be approved
Site-specific.
because it did not follow proper process at this council table.
Is there a seconder? Not seeing a seconder, Council. We still have a minute left.
Speaking to the councillors at this table, it's all about process. It's always been about process. And quite often we don't follow process. This is so important in our use of land that if we're going to change it from one zone to another, it needs to be a comprehensive discussion at the table. And I ask you please to reconsider supporting my motion.
Thank you, Councillor Gallo, second time.
Thank you. I really wasn't gonna necessarily weigh in on this particular site. I'm certainly not going to go into the detail that I went into the last time this was before us. And with all due respect to anyone who is suggesting that it went through MCR process, you're incorrect. It did not follow that process. And I'm not suggesting it shouldn't be residential or shouldn't be the way it is in our draft official plan. That's not at all what I'm suggesting, but what I'm hearing, simply in my view, is incorrect. The only really thing that I'd like to hear from staff through you, Mr. Mayor, or the representative, it certainly was and is important when we're converting employment lands to residential to do a proper study and make sure we're doing the right thing. What I need to know with hopefully with some data between now and council to show me that somebody did some type of study that this land conversion is appropriate and is the best for the municipality. Can someone provide me with that?
Shimono?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, again, I'm just going to point to the fact that it's culminated in the land use designation and the policy in the official plan. Is there a separate study on, a separate document that we can hold up on this property? No, but that could go for any parcel in town that's covered by a policy or land use designation in this new OP. And again, I'll just revert back to the interim control bylaw that was passed. I mean, it was clear that we would undertake the review of the appropriate land use and heights for this particular parcel as part of the this process. And we did with our consultants and staff, Edward and myself and our consultant team, and the land use designation for that parcel was identified in our last draft. I think that was issued back in September of this year.
Counselor?
If we're referring to when this was before us last, there was some mapping issues that we kind of jumped the gun and converted it, and then we reverted back because we agreed that this council never decided to make that conversion. Again, I'm not suggesting I'm opposed to the change. I just want to hold something in my hand that due diligence was done, because it wasn't done at the region. Councillor Gardner is correct. It was only through a letter from our previous director suggesting to take it out of the mapping and to convert it to employment lands. And then it was done without this council weighing in any way. I just want to sit here and be sure that somebody on that side took the time to say, yes, this is appropriate. And between now and council, I need to hear that. I just, in terms of the I know it's a motion to receive, yet we have an amendment on the floor. It's a little bit odd, but number 5 says that should portions of the official plan be appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal, council authorizes town staff to appear before the OLT and the hiring of external legal counsel and experts as required to support the position of the town before the tribunal hearing. I'd like to have, hopefully through you, Mr. Mayor, someone weigh in on that, because in my view, I'm happy to take the time to review any of those and have council make those decisions, because I'd like to have the leeway to say something is appropriate, something isn't appropriate. I want to avoid the expense to going to the OLT. I may not want to avoid it depending on what comes before us. I don't feel comfortable giving that delegated authority because sometimes they're pretty significant. And it's a huge document and we're not going to get it right. And somebody out there might say, no, I don't like this. I'm going to appeal. I think it should come to us to make those decisions. So unless this is a standard practice and it was there before and we're just continuing, even if that is the case, I'd still like to change it. But I'd like to hear from staff. You, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Romero?
Certainly through you, Mr. Mayor. It's a good question, Councilor Gallo. And I've heard from another, I think Councilor Gillian on this one. So I believe it was there when we last adopted our official plan back in 2010. And really the intent of this, it's different than, private applications that are appealed, where we always need to seek, obviously, direction from council. The intent here is that if council adopts a plan, that, if we do get any appeals, staff will appear at a tribunal to defend council's plan and your position on the policies that are here. But it's always our intent, and we did this back in 2010. As soon as the appeal period is over on the official plan, sometime in the early 2024, we will report back to council on any appeals that we may receive, the nature of those appeals, and the next steps. And if we need to actually appear before the tribunal, or if there's some sort of settlement, there's no question that we will be reporting on those to council. And I've spoken to our solicitor about this one as well. Again, whether it's removed, I don't think it's all that significant, because our staff's intent would be to always report back to council once the plan is in effect, and to identify any appeals that we may have received, and again outline the nature of those appeals and where do we go with these appeals.
Councilor?
Thank you. That's helpful. I'd still like to remove it. And even based on some of the communication at this meeting, that the plan is defendable, that not all our people have engaged in us, that they have issues with it. And if that truly is the case, then we shouldn't have too many of these appeals. And as such, they should come to us. So I will be voting against that one if it's put forward.
Thank you. Councilor Thompson, second time.
Thank you. Through to Mr. Romero. Mr. Romero, it states in the report that I guess to date, or we've approved $650,000 to go through this town official plan review process. And certainly that doesn't take into consideration all the time and efforts of both staff, residents, stakeholders who have been engaged over this process over the 3-4 years that we've been doing this. And so to the comments about the plan being defensible, over the last number of years, we've seen developers come before us, and inevitably one of their arguments is that they're asking for, amendments to the official plan because they're pointing to growth targets. They're pointing to a need for them to increase heights or densities to meet those targets. So based on the plan that we're presenting for, are we confident that if developers were to uphold and align to our official plan, that we can meet both the growth targets set by the 2051 timelines, as well as our recent growth targets, where we're hoping to achieve 8,000 units over the next number of years?
Mr. Romero?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, we are. And I think, David mentioned that as well, based on even the report we did a couple of months ago with respect to just our tracking list, the amount of units that we currently have formally submitted and approved or at the board. We're confident that with the land use framework in this official plan, that we will exceed our long-term growth targets. And again, our 2051 targets and their minimums are 85,000 persons. We're currently at 65,000 per persons today. So yeah, there's plenty of capacity within the town, within those intensification areas. And as it relates to the existing policy framework, to exceed those targets.
Councilor?
Thank you. And then again, through to Mr. Romero, if I heard Mr. Riley correct, part of that Made in Aurora approach was to hold the line on the maximum height of the buildings that are being put forward, because it represents the vision for the community that both the residents and the majority, if not all, of council have as well. But often when we have in conversations with regards to OLT, we hear the comment that OLT doesn't take those things into consideration. They strictly look at planning principles. And so those kind of factors are not always part of their decision making. So how do we defend the official plan when we talk about it being built on a Made in Aurora approach, when that may not be the criteria by which the OLT bases their decisions?
Say we need the province to make some changes, but Mr. Ramuno, go ahead.
You, Mr. Mayor, it's a tough one, Councillor Thompson. Of course, you're always going to get the other party, quoting policies from the provincial growth plan and the minimum targets, et cetera, even though some of those are changing or proposed to be changed. But again, as we said, I think we're confident based on the development that we've approved, development that we've seen constructed in town, that we can make strong arguments moving forward to defend those policies. Again, we know, I'm not saying we're not going to receive appeals, but we'll deal with those on as they come to us, and on a case by case basis. But I think the Made in Aurora sort of approach is just that, as you heard Mr. Riley, right? The biggest change to this plan was we've opened up our local corridors, which is new, to allow for that sort of what we call gentle or modest intensification, which wasn't there in the previous plan.
Councillor?
Thank you. Perhaps I'll rephrase it another way then. So do we feel that utilizing the Made in Aurora approach, that we have language within the official plan that translates it into good planning principles, so that we can point to that as part of the rationale for why we're holding the line where we are?
Mr. Ramuno?
To you, Mr. Mayor, exactly. And again, it's based on, the plan is based on, we're confident it's based on good planning principles. And as I mentioned before, we think it's a responsible plan in that we are dealing with our, the growth management issues and our the housing crisis and our population targets. It's balanced in the way that it's, we're protecting for our commercial corridors, our employment sector corridors, our environmental lands. And again, it's, we think it's defendable.
Thank you.
Councillor?
Thank you. That's it.
Any other comments or questions? Councillor Gilliland, second time.
Thank you. Just listening to some of those comments, and I agree that there has been a lot of hard work on this official plan, and we spent 4 years consulting with the community. So I do value all those opinions. A lot has changed in the last, I would say, 12 months, especially with the housing crisis going on. So I would agree. Obviously, we have a Made in Aurora approach, and I think everything about an official plan is having principle-based planning. And I think why we're here today is looking at our realistic goals and try to fulfill some of our duties to actually provide some of the affordable housing choices. And, for me, looking at the regional corridor and local corridor areas, I believe that there's some of the opportunity there that I wouldn't want to leave on the table and discourage developers coming forward with plans. So I would ask, we have this chart that tells us we have all these units that we can achieve in 8 years, but yet there's a lot of these plans that don't have an approved site plan, or they're sitting there idle. There's no shovel on the ground. So they just sit there. So, for how long are we going to say, yeah, there's 2,000 units in the Magna area? Well, how much longer is that going to sit there for? So I don't necessarily want to put all my eggs in one basket based on that chart. And so that's why I think it's appropriate to also look down the road and other opportunities, because as much as we are looking at some of these plans, we can't force developers to build. We can say all we want that it's appropriate there, but we can't force them to actually submit a site plan and say, yes, you're going to build today. We saw Smart Plant Center's application where no one wanted to put on the floor for discussion at 7 stories. And then it went to 2 public plannings and OLT. So it's just, sometimes I feel these conversations go out both 2 sides of the mouth. And I just feel like we're in a situation right now where we have to maybe think twice about where those opportunities are without feeling like we're always sending something to the OLT. And also there's new rules that change that we assume cost every single time it goes there. And if we want to continue to fight this, it's just going to cost taxpayers even more. So as much as I believe, yes, there's a balanced approach, and I'm sure you did a lot of outreach and I appreciate that. It's just understanding the climate that we're in today is a lot different than it was a year ago to today. And it would be responsible for us to look at those opportunities, because I don't feel that everything that's been presented is going to guarantee us those targets in the next 8 years. That's my comment on that. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Ramuno, did we actually get the report on the interim control bylaw? I just can't recollect that, if we got that report to council, if it was on an agenda or not.
Mr. Romano?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. No, as I mentioned earlier, the bylaw itself indicated that we would look at this parcel as part of this OP report, as this OP update. So again, this is the ultimate plan, the official plan update that includes the land use designation on that site and identifying it as a special policy, a specific policy area. So it was done as part of the official plan update.
Councillor?
Thank you. So from what I understanding is that we won't receive any information report on this. Is there a way that we can have something in our hands to show how we came to this conclusion?
Mr. Romano?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if council wants us to prepare a memo for council by next week, we can certainly do that. But it's basically what you've heard us say, what you heard me say this evening.
Councillor?
Thank you. It'd be nice just to have a hard copy. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Ramuno, I'm just curious, delegate had said they sent an email on the 24th about some of their concerns. I just didn't know what I was looking for when I was trying to search through my emails. So I'm assuming maybe I missed it, but could you just point me to the email and who it was sent by? Because I don't see anything here. November 24th date in my email, and I can't search anything on Evans Planning.
Mr. Romano?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we've received it. It may not have gone to all the council. We can certainly share that with members of council. I think it's the memo that Mr. Layton referred to as part of his delegation.
Councillor?
Thank you.
You any other comments, questions? Call a vote. Been sitting here for 9 years. I think I can count on one hand how many applications have actually come in and met our OP. Quite honestly, if you make it 10, they're going to ask for 15. If you make it 15, they're going to ask for 20. If you make it 20, they're going to ask for 25. There's not one community, one municipality out there that is not being asked when applications come in asking for more. You look at Markham, they allow 25, 30, but the applications are coming for more than what their maximum allows. It is the way it works. And until, and I know Councillor Thompson knows about this because the amount of work that we did in regards to the OMB back then, now the tribunal, the legislation, and quite frankly, I'm going to use a word that I really don't want to use it, but I'm going to say it stinks. When it comes to the tribunal, the way it works is the problem. There is no red tape here at our town. Unless we as a council decide to say we're going to go to another public planning meeting instead of following through the process. That's where things get bogged down. And that's when someone decides to take us to the tribunal. If we continue through the process, get to the end and say yes or no, they won't take us to the tribunal until they hear out what this council is going to make a decision on and what's best for our community. But changing our heights? No. We want, as has been mentioned, we want a made in Aurora solution that fits the vision of our community. We don't want to be, and with all due respect to Newmarket, Richmond Hill, Markham, Vaughan, we don't want to be these communities. We're unique in our own right. We're building a community that is not only for today, but is for the future generations, to allow for that flexibility to have a diverse housing stock within our community. And we talk about it all the time. But let's not kid ourselves. Until legislation's changed that ROPs are allowed to be upheld, you're going to continuously have applications that come in one after the other that's always asking for more than what ROP says is allowed. Now, I'm confident that we've had some conversations lately with the new minister that has talked about the fact that he does want to now all of a sudden make OPs have a little bit more authority. And I'm curious to what he means by that and where any changes to legislation will take us. But I'm encouraged because it's one of the first times I've heard that since back in 2016 when we actually did achieve some changes through the Liberal government back then. So I'm encouraged to see that there's a possibility that some things could change to allow for our OPs to be upheld and for us to be able to uphold these height restrictions that we have in place. And actually, we have moved. Our height restrictions were actually lower. We've gone up. We've made changes. We've moved with what's happening nowadays. We're seeing that housing crisis, but we've heard from Mr. Ramuno, we've heard from Mr. Riley. Not only can we achieve our targets, we can exceed them. So I'm looking forward to having a plan that is an Aurora plan. That is the vision of our community. And hopefully the province agrees. And we can make those necessary changes so we can uphold it, and that our plan is actually worth more than the paper that it's written on. And voted on separately. Who did you moved it, Councillor L seconded, are you two okay with that, putting it back on and vote on it separately? Yeah. Pardon? Oh, just do it now. I got mover and seconder saying, okay, so I'll do that. If we can put the original up with the amendment that Councillor Gardner made. And then we'll vote. Councillor Gallo, did you want all of them separate or just that last one? Just 5? Anyone else want anything else separate? So 1, that the report be received. 2, that the final draft official plan be adopted. 3, that an adopted bylaw be brought forward at a future council meeting in January. 4, that staff forward the adopted official plan to York Region for final approval. 5, that should portions of the official plan be appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal, Council authorize town staff to appear before the OLT, and the hiring of external legal counsel and experts are as required to support the position of the town before a tribunal hearing. And we have 6, correct? Which is the amendment that we passed from Councillor Gardner, that the vision statement be amended to include the phrase protection of the environment. Natural environment. Councillor Gardner.
Can the site
Quickly.
specific policy be called separately?
You
Site-specific
tried to
policy.
put an amendment, so I can't, and no one seconded it.
I beg your pardon? Oh,
You tried to put an amendment and no one seconded it. So
but the site specific policy is,
I know, but I can't pull it out, just one thing out of here on this for you. I understand what you're asking for. I can't do that.
then
I
I'll
know
have-
why I get it.
Then I'll have to
I
vote
wish I could try to
against.
help you, but I can't
Okay,
pull it
then
out.
I'll have to
okay?
vote against this.
Okay. 2 and 5, so 2 and 5 separate. So we'll do. Well, I think Councillor Gallo wants 5 separate from everything else. Okay, so we're gonna do 1 just to receive it. Then we're gonna do 2, 3, and 4. Then we're gonna do, actually, can we do 2, 3, 4, and 6? Or you want to do 6 separate now as well? So we're gonna do 1. Then we're gonna do 2, 3, and 4. Then we're gonna do 5. Then we're gonna do 6. So I'm gonna call a vote on 1, just to receive. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. 2, 3, and 4. Call a vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That fails. 5. All those in favor? Opposed? That fails. 6. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. It's 9.2. Thank you. 9.2, Community Partnership Grant Update, Proposed Policy Revision. Recommendations that report number CMS 23-057 be received. And 2, that the proposed policy revision to the Community Partnership Grant be approved. Would someone like to move that recommendation? Councillor Gallo, seconder. Councillor Weiss, any comments or questions on this one? Councillor Weiss?
Yeah, I want to applaud the report. It's a very good report. The only thing that, and I recognize the delegation to the manager as opposed to the director, and I appreciate that. What I've always concerned about these community grants is that there's really no after impact discussion, meaning we give money away for good reasons. We tell people what they're supposed to use it for. But at the end of the day, the report isn't anything more than, or at least my experience is that we don't ask for the community impact of the money that we give. So how is that money used and what kind of impact do we see in it? So I'd like to ask how we could look at providing another box in there that asks for a report at the end of the grant. So they're reporting on a grant, and maybe it's not for $1,000, but perhaps it's for something from $5,000 to $10,000. I'd like to see some impact reporting so we can say this money was used and this is what happened.
That question?
Through you to
Thank you.
whomever.
Mr. Bertrand?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to ask Lisa Worth to come up and address the questions.
Sure. Lisa, welcome.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Weiss. The current program actually does ask for a report back, and we do ask for an accounting of the project and an impact report from each applicant. That is a new piece of this new program.
Councillor?
Okay, well, I didn't see it here as part of that impact. Could you give me an example of where you might use that, just so I get a feel for it?
A question?
Yes, through you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Worth?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Weiss. I'm not quite sure what you're asking for in terms of using it. It's a requirement for each recipient to report back to us after their project. And in order to apply again for a future grant or that sort of thing, they have to provide this report.
Councillor?
Sorry, and the report is mainly financial, or does it use any other? We haven't seen that report, and I don't know what that report is, so I apologize for that. But I mean, if we're giving somebody $5,000 for something, we not only want them to tell us how that was spent and spent wisely and according to the policies, but do we get an idea of what happened in the community? Because I think it'd be valuable to be able to say that we helped 3,000 kids or whoever it is. So I'm just looking at an extended impact, not just the money. But if you're saying it's there, I'm wondering why we haven't got something articulated in this. That's all I'm asking.
Is that a question?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Through the chair.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Weiss. So the report does ask for financial accounting as well as numbers, attendance, impact, as best as the organization can measure that. It's different depending on each project. We haven't reported back to council on that because we're still gathering those reports from our first intake. Organizations have, I believe, 90 days to do their report after their event. So in some cases, some of the events and projects that we funded haven't even taken place yet. So those reports are slowly coming in as the projects are being completed.
Councillor?
Great. So just before the council meeting next week, if you could just send me an email and show me something that has been done in the past for an impact assessment, that would suffice for me. And thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Gilliland?
Thank you. I noticed on one of the revisions was the food and meeting expenses. Although it's a very gray area that's been explained, Grant Evaluation Committee has discretion to determine what is reasonable food and meeting expenses. And I was just hoping you can give me an example of what you mean by that.
That question?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Ms. Harworth.
Sorry.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Gilliland. It's sort of at the discretion of the grant evaluation committee in terms of what would be a reasonable amount per person on food and beverage for an event or activity that an applicant is applying for. We've received some that are quite high, and we feel they're unreasonable expenses and not a good use of this grant money in terms of the food and beverage and how the organization wanted to spend it and who they wanted to cater and that sort of thing. So it really is at the discretion of the grant evaluation committee and the evaluation process to determine what is reasonable. And in some cases, that's going to mean they aren't going to get their full ask. We will fund a portion of their ask based on what we feel is reasonable.
Counselor?
Thank you. That actually makes a lot of sense. So I appreciate the clarity. I assume that would, as an example, it could be an event that's 100% volunteering on a specific event. It could be for a school event or competition or such. Something like this wouldn't apply to a fundraising gala where somebody would want to have expenses paid for by way of food for a fundraiser. Like that would not occur. That wouldn't fall in the same category. I just want to make sure that it wouldn't be interpreted that way if somebody was looking for some grant money for a fundraising campaign and yet wanted to utilize that for food. Is that something that would be requested? I just feel like in the past that that's something that we don't do, that it's really only meant for supporting the operations of a specific events or gatherings or whatnot. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Ms. Horwath.
Swarth?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Gilliland. Yes, that's correct for the most part. It's food and beverages related to a celebratory type event, not necessarily a gala type event where expensive plates are typically purchased and tickets are sold and that sort of thing. It's that's not typically something that would be funded under this program.
Counselor?
Thank you. And I would hope that that would also amount to, so if someone wanted to run some sort of gala that they received the grant so they didn't have to charge tickets, then it becomes, in my opinion, a free-for-all. Oh, let's just go to the town. We don't have to pay anything because they'll pay for it all. And I just want to make sure there's some parameters around that, that, when we are providing food and beverage, it's for an appropriate use, because it seems like it's not specifically clear as to what that means. So is that something that staff will take in mind? Is there some criteria that you're going to follow? Like right now, the way it's being revised is very gray, and how are we going to know how it's going to be utilized properly? Through Mr. Chair to Ms. Horwath. So Horwath or Horwath? Worth. Okay, I did say it right.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Gilliland. That's correct. So when an applicant applies, they have to provide a budget. An itemized budget, and through that process we can see what they're planning, how they're planning on spending the money they're applying for. And again, if the grant evaluation committee determines that some of their expenses seem excessive or aren't eligible, we would score that and adjust the grant amount based on that information.
Counselor?
Okay, I will leave it at that. I think the intent is there. I just don't want to have to come back to council if we feel it's being, I would assume that you would come to council and maybe make some parameters a little bit more tight and clear so people aren't coming in and interpreting that differently for other uses. I just, as a forewarning. My other question I had here was the grant issuance. So I understand that you are swaying away from having the director's authority only to the manager of recreation and the manager of cultural events. And while I think it's good that there is trust and confidence in other staff, I'm just curious as to why you wouldn't add or the director. So all three of you could all be in situations to where, some of you might be not available at that time, but the director certainly being, I guess, top of the heap kind of thing, that why you wouldn't just say all three of you versus completely removing the director altogether.
Swarth?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Gilliland, we could certainly consider that. What we found through the process in the last 8 months is it helps with communication with our applicants when they have a consistent staff person they can liaise with. So they applied for a grant, they get the information that they've got received a grant, and then they get an agreement or a letter that's signed by the director, and then they have further questions and they don't know who to go to. So now they're going to the director with questions, operational questions about their grant, that sort of thing. So we felt that if we made it the two manager positions, it just helps for smoother communication and efficiency, especially with the successful applicants if they've got questions after the fact. But we can certainly add the director on as an addition to the managers.
Counselor.
Thank you. As a comment, I'd like to see that added just because of obviously just a corporate tree and knowing everybody's rules. And, perhaps in these letters, it's whoever writes it, signs it, and then the copy goes to the director and the other, whichever one of those two rules, and be the point of contact. While I respect everything you're saying, I just like to see the or for the director, just so everybody understands the rules of engagement and that you're all involved and play a role. So I think that would be my request.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you. Just a simple question. I've never heard of the Shadow Path Theater. Is that a theater in Aurora?
That question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor,
Thank
too.
you. Swarth.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Gardner. They are an active theater group in Aurora. They put on, I'll call it sort of short-term productions using a variety of venues, and they've been quite successful.
Thank you very
Councillor.
much.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. 10-minute health break. That is live. Sorry. Thank you, Councilor Gallo, for letting me know. So 9.3, pending list review. Recommendations that report number CS 23-078 be received. 2, that items marked completed be removed from the pending list. Someone like to move that recommendation? Councilor Thompson, seconder. Councilor Weiss. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, call a vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. 9.4, application for site plan, RP Partners, Aurora Limited, Polo Club. Recommendations that 1, that report number PDS 23-150 be received. 2, that the site plan application SP 2020-06 be approved to permit the development of 3 7-story apartment buildings. The total of 345 units, 115 units per apartment building with 2 levels of underground parking and at grade parking for a total of 445 parking spaces. And 3, that a total of 590 persons, 345 apartment units worth of servicing capacity be assigned to the subject development. Someone like to move the recommendation? Councilor Gallo, seconder. Councilor Gilliland, any comments or questions? Councilor Gallo.
Thank you. I just wanted to, one question about, just find it. On page 7 of 15 under development phasing, as per section 37, agreement between the town and the owner in exchange for an increase in density and height, the owner has committed to provide one entire building 1, 115 units for affordable housing. At the time of drafting this report, the owner has not finalized a partnership with York Region, but are in discussions for affordable housing portion. Through you, Mr. Mayor, can we just get if there are any updates from staff in terms of if there's any progress with the developer in communicating to York Region for affordable housing for building number 1?
Great question, Councillor. My suggestion would be that if everyone's not comfortable moving forward as is, I've talked to the chairman about this specific site and the deal essentially with Housing York. He's promised me that he would be providing me with the information that we need necessary to make a decision by next week. So if we want to just receive this at this time, that would be my recommendation. And then next week we can deal with this and I can have that information for all of us sitting here at this table from Housing York as well as York Region.
I'm prepared to move forward with the thing with the whole project. I just wanted to know whether or not there was update. Good to hear. We'll have something from them before council so I can make an informed decision. I would also like to note that this is probably going to be our last. I don't know if there's any more of these types of applications, site plan applications coming to us because there's delegated authority to staff, not by us, but by the region. Sorry, by the province. I just want to know what a loss we will have reading this and understanding this application. Sure, we can go to staff and they could provide us with a summary of this, but that's not always in the public eye. And I think there's a lot of benefit to having this on a public agenda and understanding the ins and outs of this entire application. So to me, it's sad that the province is doing this and is forcing us to doing this. I don't know how many site plan applications we've denied, and what, sure, it is a sense to fast track things and make things go further, but it's at the expense of having these things before us and having them exposed to the public, which I believe is extremely beneficial. So I guess an election isn't that far away.
2026. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. I raised the same issue that Councillor Gallo just mentioned with Mr. Ramono. My concern is that, part of this proposal was predicated on this idea that the third tower would be for affordable housing. And so, we move forward with the application on the understanding that this would happen. It still hasn't materialized. And I wanted to get a degree of confidence that this actually would come to fruition, because it does say that if it doesn't, well, then the property, that portion of it anyways, would be offered to the municipality at market rates. But, that's probably going to be a couple $1 million. And I don't necessarily, in my opinion, foresee us going forward with that. So, in exchange for height and density, we've struck a deal, but I don't necessarily have a confidence that that deal will be carried through at this point in time. And so I too would like to get at least a better idea from the region with regards to the likelihood of this happening before finally approving this. So I appreciate your willingness to talk to the chairman and or getting more information and bring it back to council. I think it is also relevant through you to Mr. Ramono. Mr. Ramono, we did have a conversation with regards to that other tower. And you also indicated that there's a hold on it, so to speak, subject to this whole agreement. So perhaps you can just share with council the conversation we had in that information as well that's pertinent.
Mr. Ramono.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw that were approved by the tribunal last year, the actual zoning bylaw, and it's one of the figures, has a holding provision on the one building closest to Leslie Street. And the condition of that holding provision is that until an agreement is executed between the town and the owner to secure that building for affordable housing, that holding stays in place. So which means they can't develop that one building, notwithstanding council approving the site plan that's before you. I have had discussions with the owner. He's obviously still interested in moving forward, but they obviously wanted the assurance of getting the site plan approved. That way they can sit down with the regional community housing staff to work on an agreement. And I did speak to a staff person at community housing but a month or 6 weeks ago, and they are still interested in the site. And their question to me was, when is the owner moving forward? And I just relayed the information that they're waiting for their site plan approval. But just to put council at ease, the zoning has an H on it for that one building, so they can't move forward with that until there's an executed agreement to deal with that affordable housing provision.
Councillor.
Thank you. And, I'm not necessarily opposed to the recommendation, but I just would like to have that confidence that, the conversations and essentially the deal that was struck is going to come to fruition. So I appreciate any additional information that can be brought to council by next week.
I'll make sure we have that information. Councillor Gilliland.
Thank you. I think all the questions I had were answered, or just rather providing information. Regardless, I won't be standing in the way of the movement of this project. It sounds like it's a very good project. We need the housing. And it sounds like to me that York Region is interested in partnering with this applicant. And I think that we need to do the right thing and allow the site plan to move forward so they can get the ball rolling. Thanks.
Any other comments or questions? All vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. 9.5, or sign at Aurora Town Square, the report to receive for information. Someone like to move that? Councillor Thompson, second. Receiving for information. Nobody wants to receive for information. Councillor Gallo, thank you. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Councillor Gallo, go ahead.
Just some questions about just the details around this. Do we know what the payment schedule is for the $500,000? I guess to you or
Mr. CL?
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, there will be a follow-up report in closed session, I believe, next cycle for an update on the all of the campaign, which will include some of that detail.
Councillor?
And do we know whether the donor is looking to put their name on something on this? For you, Mr. Mayor?
Mr. CL?
Through Mr. Mayor, right now there hasn't been a determination whether there's what the recognition itself is going to look like. The interest was in sponsoring something at Town Square of a significant value, and we didn't have anything on the list. So the sponsor is interested in this, but we haven't discussed how best to recognize it on the site because we obviously don't want something that detracts from the actual thing itself. So so those details have to be worked out yet.
Councillor?
But is it their intent? Is it our intent to identify in some way who this is?
Do you, Mr. Mayor? Of course, we will identify, but we're not sure what recognition they want to see on the site, like what in return for their donation.
Councillor?
Have we guided them to this, or is this something that they were requesting for you, Mr. Mayor?
Mr. CL?
See, Mr. Chair, when there was nothing of any significant size, this was something that was contemplated long ago, but not put in the scope of the project because it was figured it was a costly item. So it was proposed as something that would be in the future and to see if there was interest, because again, we had nothing of the size or magnitude that was being offered. And so that's when the sponsor showed interest.
Councillor?
Okay. I have some ideas of what the money can be put towards, but
Councillor Reese?
Nothing. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been asked.
Any other comments or questions? Councillor Gilliland?
Just to follow up to Councillor Gallen's questions through Mr. Chair, Mr. Nadarozny, were there other options that were offered to the person who wants to donate to the capital project? It's my understanding that we have a capital campaign that's towards the current project itself. Feels like this is an added item. And I'm just wondering if there's other things within the project that we could allocate this to that we are already spending money on.
CL?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the only items of the magnitude would have been a whole series of things. And the sponsor, the donor wasn't interested in having their name on a bunch of smaller things. So they just asked if there was any opportunity for a single larger thing. So this was put forward as a new thing for sure. It was something, again, that we talked about and we're sort of, mused about various locations to possibly put them in the future. In order to take this further, though, we have to actually, and the timing is right that we could, if we're going to accept the donation towards this project, the time is right to do it now rather than a modification, 6 months later. We still haven't actually finished the courtyard area. So it's actually very timely, even if it's just to put the electrical in and nothing else. At least that would be a lot better than doing it after the fact. So that's why it's here in the rush.
Thank you. Do we know what our fundraising goal is for a capital campaign?
CL?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe the overall goal is 5 million total for the all parts of the campaign.
Councillor?
Thank you. And through Mr. Chair, Mr. Nadarozny, and how much have we reached?
CL?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's the subject of the report on the next week, because I know there's a number that are just literally getting signed up now. So I'm not sure what that full total is, but there's a significant update coming a week today.
Counselor?
in closed session.
Thank you. Okay, I think the last number I had was in and around the $2 million mark. So less than 50% of our goal, I think would be kind of fair to speculate at this time. I guess my only concern with this project, as it was just kind of put in front of us, and then we had a sponsor that we're still trying to raise capital for the current project that we have on hand, but yet we're adding things to this project when we haven't even finished building what we intended on doing. And so I just have a little concern. So if we're still trying to raise another 60% of our fundraising goal, if other people want to come in and donate another 500,000 or $500,000, what do we have left for them? I mean, if we have one person already who's believes it's not significant enough, or wherever it is, there's no naming rights, what is that incentive to this campaign? So I'm just worried that others may be deterred if we're not offering something.
A question?
Yep. Mr. Nadarozny.
Through the chair.
Through Mr. Chair.
Mr. Seo.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure I understand what the question.
What do we have? Are we still offering enough opportunity for people to want to donate significantly if we're already deterring a $500,000 donation? We haven't even met, in my opinion, I'd say just to say roughly around 60% to go. Then I question other donators would be feeling the same way.
Through
you, Mr. Mayor. So the community campaign is yet to launch. So that anticipated a number of much smaller donations out in the community. And that phase wasn't expected to be entered into until after the major portion was done. If we had someone come again with a large donation, if the individual wanted it to be on something in particular, we'd be in the same predicament. We don't have anything of that magnitude. The larger items, the bridge and those sort of things, and some things you'll find out about on next week have all been spoken for by donors. So we are significantly better than the last report you had, though. So the number is up quite a bit, and we look forward to finishing the campaign. And we think there's still interest in the smaller things that are available as well.
Councillor.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, call vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Carries. Notice motions for next week. No regional report. Business. Councillor Weiss. Councillor Gillan.
Thank you. I'm going to utilize new business since didn't realize the meeting had started before I had sat down in relation to the pending list. So I have a couple questions. To you, Mr. Chair, to Ms. Teenkamp. I have here marked completed for the invasive species project and insects. And I understand that within the spring, a couple times with communications department, I had to instigate why there was no collaborative cleanup day. I don't recollect that there was one. And it was just really information at the market. And I just was really hoping that collaboration would happen. And I don't think that it has. And it says it's completed. And I'm just hoping to have a little bit more insight as to what's been done, because I feel like, I've missed it.
Through the chair. Is that a question?
Did I not say through you, Mr. Chair? Through you,
No.
Mr. Chair, to Ms. Teenkamp.
Okay, Ms. Teenkamp.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So yes, we do have some designated days that we're working on. We've been pulling those together in conjunction with our cleanup day. And in addition with the Arboretum, and we have a couple other community groups that are doing like garlic mustard pulls, etc. So those things are going to be ongoing and probably some enhancement, especially with the David Tomlinson Nature Reserve coming on. Nature Aurora is going to be actively doing some buckthorn culling as well. So those are also community events that we're working on currently.
Councillor.
Perfect. I appreciate that. I guess through you, Mr. Chair, to Madam Clerk. There's a reference to the bylaw for Council Compensation Review Committee to be brought back. And yet there's no status. So I was really confused as to why that was there.
Madam Deputy Clerk.
Sorry, which number was that?
CS7. And it says to be brought back prior to the end of 2022-2026 term of office. But there's no status, no comments.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, that is an error. It should say completed there. It was brought back. Sorry, that one is in progress. So there's no update at this time. It'll be brought back to a future meeting.
Councillor.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Ms. Doug Bertrand. There was a motion to do some collaboration in regards to the air-supported court domes in Aurora and to explore other locations or any public-private partnership strategies, consult with local sport organizations, include these locations and partnership options for an indoor sports facility. Although it says it's completed, and it was through the development strategy report, which I was trying to brief through it. It just came at the end of October, but it was for receive. In my opinion, there was nothing there pointing to the specific motion. When I saw that, I actually reached out to some people I understand who had an interest in a partnership who has not been contacted, because I did confirm that with them. So I'm just curious as to why this is marked as completed. I would like to see this as in progress because I feel like there's still a lot more work to do and there's still opportunity on the floor there. And so I'm just a little confused as to the status.
Mr. Bertrand.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll have to get back to you with information on that.
Councillor.
Thank you very much. I already talked about the housing affordability plan, and that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Gardner, new business.
Mr. Mayor, through you to Mr. Muno. Mr. Muno, I was contacted by a resident yesterday. They said that somebody is building an addition on their home and that the town doesn't check the electrical safety. Is that true?
Mr. Muno.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the Electrical Safety Authority is the inspects the electrical wiring. But if you want to provide me with the address, send me an email. I can look into the address.
And I'm sorry. Do we before we finalize an approval, as a matter of course, do we check for electrical safety in both a new build and in an addition to a home?
Through you,
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you,
Through you, Mr. Mayor. That is the responsibility of the Electrical Safety Authority to do those inspections on all additions and new builds.
That's what I thought.
Thank you. New business. New business. Go ahead.
Just some clarity. Council had passed a resolution changing the procedural bylaw to have notices of motion discussed at GC. Are we doing it because we haven't passed
the bylaw
from the last council?
Yes.
So it'll start.
Yes.
Okay, got it. I thought that was the case. Just a heads up that at last council, I forgot to pull the facility allocation policy, and I was going to ask for deferral to February. I've spoken to staff; they're on board with it. Some changes may happen, so just a heads up that at council, the next council, I'll be asking for that reconsideration and deferral.
Good, thank you. PSA. Public service. Councilor Gilliland, PSA. Call for adjournment. Yeah.
Thing, which is the Hanukkah celebration. on Sunday, Monday, the 11th. I don't know what time it starts. The actual celebration of Hanukkah starts on Thursday evening.
Absolutely. It's the fifth night, correct? Monday?
6 o'clock, I
Yeah,
think.
so we'll be lighting the fifth light, fifth candle, and yeah, it's 6 o'clock. People can start coming, and 6:30 the evening begins. Motion to adjourn. Councilor Thompson, Councilor Gallo, all those in favor? Opposed? That carries. We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.